And that one.
Is everybody this morning still in bed?
My imposter syndrome is seeing if we all
I actually saw your title and I was like, this is great. I'm very excited. I'm gonna play it on Saturday.
Oh, there you go. I'm ready to put it on Friday night.
Oh, fair enough. My excited night.
That never ends, by the way. You still go to bed at
She just silence us.
As in, she's trying to take over the bed now, or?
No. She was just blocking.
Welcome everyone to come in, and we have an online audience, and it's 3:30, so we're a minute late already.
Alrighty, let's unmute this. Alrighty, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our second day of the OPA conference. My name is Vanessa Hara, and I am one of the directors on the board of the OPA. We had a wonderful first day. I was actually really sad to miss it, but it was really wonderful hearing about all the presentations yesterday. And I'm really excited for what we have lined up for y'all today. Kicking us off on our final day of the conference. Are we on?
Oh, just turn his mic on.
Oh, are we good now with the feedback? Okay, perfect. Kicking off our final day of the conference is Michael Bricker's presentation, Getting Ahead in Therapy, Psilocybin, Esketamine, and MDMA in the Treatment of Mental Health and SUVs. We are going to skip the...
Can you turn off the light for a moment?
It's off.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna go ahead and welcome Michael up here. We're gonna skip the bio so we can jump right into the presentation. All right, thank you, Michael. And then, yep.
Are you able to hear me? Yeah. Okay. Technology
Oh,
is,
you still need a lavalier mic though, if you're gonna move around, because we have an online audience, and they need to be able to hear you too.
technology is wonderful when it works. And the bane of existence when it doesn't. I had a great deal of sympathy for the presenter yesterday in the gut-brain connection video. Shakespeare once said that to err is human, but to really screw things up requires a computer. And this morning, I want to make us aware of the fact that those of us who are seeing folks in person, and maybe even some of us who aren't, who are doing more testing and stuff like that, we have a problem. And the problem is that the use of psychedelic-assisted treatment is getting way out ahead of the research. And so we have to be able, I think we have an ethical obligation to be kind of informed about that and what it is that we're going to do. So with apologies for the pun, getting ahead in therapy, I thought we might spend some time this morning talking about that. And despite the date, we will not be discussing the psychedelic properties of cannabis. This is me. I'm not going to bore you with my bio. It's on the website if you're really interested. Just suffice it to say that I identify as a person with lived experience in both depression and substance use, and I've been doing this for about 40 years. As I said, there we go. I have no conflicts to disclose, and also, even though I am a member of NADAC and I am the training director for the Oregon chapter of the NADAC, these opinions are my own. They don't necessarily reflect the opinions of OPA or NADAC. So a couple of things that we hope to do today is talk a little bit about the history. We can't understand the present without the past. And so understanding a little bit about the history, kind of summarizing some of the developing research, and it's moving at just a tremendous clip, but also list 3 ways in which some of these substances can potentially be very helpful and very useful in the treatment of substance use and mental health disorders. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the STEMS Institute in Eugene, which is where I am, we reside on the borrowed land, the unceded lands of the Puyallup and some other tribes. Lane County actually had 5 tribes originally, the Siletz and Chetco and some other ones. So we're all looking for an answer for ourselves, for our patients, and perhaps for ourselves. And could psychedelic-assisted therapy be a part of the solution? Well, I think it could be. So let's park our preconceptions at the door and see what we can learn today. Examining our biases. We all have them. And one of them is, are we talking about drugs or are we talking about medicines? I think the distinction that's useful for me is a medicine is something that people take to get well. A drug is something that people take to get off. But drugs are considered to be dangerous, and they're illegal, and they're substances that have a very high potential for abuse. Medicines are legal substances that can be helpful and useful. And psychedelics are illegal substances that have been proven to have medicinal qualities. Now, several of these have been approved. Ketamine, as most of you know, we have my colleague out in the lobby has an exhibit on the use of Spravato. This has been approved by the FDA, but LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, of course, is legal in Oregon. And so we're starting to catch up to things. Now, Dr. Lester Greenspoon has done a lot of work on this. A psychedelic drug actually has very, very little potential for abuse or dependence. There may be a psychological overuse with some people, just as some people overuse food or video games or anything else. But in terms of the physiological aspect of substance dependence, it simply isn't there. No one becomes addicted to peyote. It just doesn't happen. So some of these things, why is it of interest? Well, it helps to develop some psychological insight, and interpersonal and trusting environment is really important, and I'm going to come back to that again and again and again, because I submit to you that the opposite of addiction is not abstinence. The opposite of addiction is connection. So, psychedelics can do for us what the telescope did for Copernicus. It allows us to look at the universe in a much different way and to see things that we weren't able to see before. What we do with that is up to us and our responsibility, but it's true. So in psychotherapy, I think this can be considered the equivalent of the Buddhist concept of thoughts without a thinker, or perhaps Act's idea of self as context. So let's learn from the history. Plant medicine healing has been around with indigenous people for millennia, since time before memory. And some of these reality-altering plant medicines are used for ceremonial as well as physical healing. Ayahuasca, ibogaine, peyote, and psilocybin are used as entheogens, or using for the, altered states of a religious or ceremonial nature. LSD is a little different. It was synthesized in 1938, widely used by psychiatrists for about 15 years. Then, unfortunately, Timothy Leary came along, and LSD became associated with the counterculture, and particularly the anti-Vietnam War, and it was outlawed for political reasons that had nothing to do with the psychoactive properties of it. So then it was made illegal Schedule I drug in 1968, so then the research shifted to MDMA, which is not ecstasy. Ecstasy is a street drug. MDMA is manufactured in a licensed facility. So looking at some of the names of these things, psychedelic means manifesting the mind or the soul, and LSD is probably the most familiar one that we're aware of. Entheogens cause God or an inspirational sense of self to come into being. Activates what some researchers call the God spot. There seems to be one little nugget in the brain that is associated with transcendental experiences. Empathogens really heighten the sense of connection, with other people and with kind of whatever it is that's out there that gives meaning to the universe. And then psilocybin does all of those things, but it also really accelerates neuroplasticity and the interconnections within the brain. So entheogen is a neologism for psychoactive substances that are used in a ceremonial context. So they're psychoactive substances that are dose-dependently introduce profound changes in perception, including the experience of time in particular, time and space, as well as alterations in moods. So these things have been around for many, many, many years. These are the four that we're going to look at. I'm also going to include peyote because it's one of these classes of drugs. What is the problem with this classification that we just used? Well, they've got nothing to do with the research. And we know that because there's really damn little research and particularly research that says, oh, these things are dangerous, we ought to stay away from these. That's really much more of a political or a personal opinion than it is any kind of research-based. So it's an outdated system, and it's really very biased. It's really very biased in political and religious ways and some other societal things. So overall, what are the things that seem to be, what are the things that we do know? We know, regardless of the drug, that professional administration yields the best clinical results. Well, duh. But in order for us to be able to do that, we have to have at least some knowledge of what it is that we're doing. Avoiding negative experiences from these substances, and what we're doing is we're challenging people's experience We're helping them to expand their experiential realm to something that may lead to some insights which can lead to life repair or perhaps life enrichment. Relaxation and positive reinforcement is really important in this. How does it work? Generally speaking, there are preparation sessions, usually 3 or 4. You do an intake just like you do with anything else. You're not going to prescribe an antidepressant to somebody that you just met. You have to have an idea of what this person's life is like. What's their worldview? What's their view of themselves within that world? And what is it that they're trying to achieve? So we have these preparation sessions to talk about things that they may experience, to perhaps normalize some of the supranormal experiences that are likely to happen with psychedelic and psychoactive things. And then there's usually a medicinal session, usually 1, sometimes 3 with psilocybin. Sometimes there are as many as 3 that are kind of telescoped together. And then there's an integration session afterward to make sense of it. So talk therapy, because this is where we come in. This is where we become really important in this, because many of us will not be administering these things ourselves or in the clinics where we work. They may be going to another provider for that. But it's our job to help them on the front end and to help them make sense of it on the back end. What happens if we don't do that? Well, if any of you have seen people who are using psychedelics recreationally, sometimes the experiences can be not real great. And so there's a lot of dysregulation, particularly people who come from the experience of trauma can have some very, very bad reactions. They're trying this stuff either out of curiosity or desperation, and having a really bad reaction that just redintegrates all of the stuff that they're trying to get rid of. All of these things are dose dependent, and so you never know what you're getting when you buy a little baggie on the street. So where do these things work? They work, most of our interventions are targeted on the orbitofrontal cortex, right? Mostly that's what we do. We're trying to go in the front door and hope that our cognitive behavioral therapy and our ACT and some of these things are going to go down to the limbic system, which is where most of these problems reside. Most of you have had this experience at one point or another. You walk away from a conversation or thinking, my God, what was I thinking? The answer is you weren't. You were feeling, you were operating out of the limbic system, which is, beneath the level of conscious awareness most of the time. So most of us know about the amygdala and the hippocampus and how all of those things happen. But what happens with psychedelics is, in a sense, they come in the back door. They come in and they target these structures directly without having to go through all of the filtering from the prefrontal cortex. And what happens is the profound sense of connection that happens and the quieting effect on the HPA system, the down-regulation of the anxiety that brings people most of the time to see us, and there's this huge burgeoning of neuronal connections within the brain. Many people have described their experiences with any psychedelic as, it's the old joke about what do the Buddhists say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. That's the experience that people can have. All of a sudden, there's this dissolution of ego, which can be very frightening for some people. But there's this dissolution of our normal sense of self and our default mode network of being in the world, and all of a sudden we're a part of everything else. We're a part of all that is, which can be a very wonderful experience. So how do they work? Well, what happens is most of them work within the limbic system. They downregulate the amygdala, which is part of the fight or flight part. That's down. And also, they turn down the volume in the hippocampus. You don't have a blackout in the sense of, that you don't have a recollection of what is happening, but the information gets encoded, I'm told, in a different way. By the way, I should back up and do one caveat. I'm not speaking from personal experience in this, and I'm not proselytizing. I just want to be I should have said that at the very beginning. I don't have personal lived experiences with any of these that we're talking about today except peyote. I have had some limited experience with that in ceremonial circumstances, but the rest of it I have not experienced personally. But the research is there, and some of my patients who have come to see me have been able to talk about this in ways that are pretty amazing. I was telling the gentleman out of the lobby, I had one patient a couple of years ago with truly intractable depression. He had tried every single antidepressant under the sun. We did EMDR together. We did all kinds of stuff. A course of TMS, and he was better. And it seemed to be very durable over time. So how does this stuff work? Well, it fosters this increased connectivity within the rest of the brain and bringing a larger and expanded sense of self. Increasing of nurturing, one of the things that it does, particularly MDMA, a real increase in oxytocin and the sense of the bonding, that sense of comfort. And Optimi allows a sense of connectedness and peace. So what it does is it downregulates our normal consciousness. So harm reduction, we have to go into this very mindfully. We have to go into this with good preparation. We have to assess what are the risks and benefits, just like anything else. It's part of informed consent. We all do that with our patients. Set and setting is really important. But one of the reasons that I'm doing this talk with you, because I'm not assuming that you're all going to go out and buy Spravato and start giving it to your patients. The people who come to us, many of them, particularly those who work with people with depression, people with substance abuse issues, people with trauma, they have been living with this for a very, very long time. And they're all antennae out to here, right? They have spent much of their lives looking for the people who don't like them, and they will pick up on that. If you have any skepticism, if you have any preconceived notions that you bring into the room, neuroception, the polyvagal instantaneous assessment of safety that happens way below the level of conscious thought. You've already lost, you just don't know it yet. So we talked about it being dose dependent, and also the mode of administration, using the method that is safest. Spravato, ketamine, we'll get into that a little bit more, but the only approved use of the FDA is the intranasal. Injections and the sublingual are off-label, even though they can be very effective, but research hasn't caught up to practice yet. Looking at family history, preparing them for the experience that they're likely to have. During the experience, being mindful, and this is why it is often beneficial to have trip sitters. In Eugene, we have a licensed psilocybin service center. And one of the things that they do is they have these specially trained people who are there with you throughout the entire experience, which can be 6 to 8 hours, sometimes longer. And so that's a significant commitment on their part. Also a significant commitment on your part. It's expensive. Looking at during the experience, being mindful of what's going on. Sometimes they'll play soothing music. Sometimes there's some aromatherapy stuff that goes on. I'm told that there are particular essential oils that are particularly helpful for the psilocybin experience. And then afterward, being able to integrate these insights and bring us to a larger, hopefully to a larger experience of the world. It's very different from the model that many of us practice under. In the psychopharmacological, the patient is the compliant consumer, right? We kind of tell them what to do and they're expected to do it. We give them homework assignments, we give them worksheets, we give them stuff to try out. We give them successive approximations to take home and try. The brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, is considered to be the place where all of the healing is going to happen. And so we look at the signs and symptoms that define the disorder, and we're hoping that those things go down. So it's a very Cartesian mind-body split approach to things. And the goal is to increase adaptive skills and decreasing dysphoria and stuff like that. So the psychedelic therapy model expects a much deeper level of engagement with the patient. Self and culture are included in the clinical narrative. That's particularly the case in the Native American church and within that tradition. It attends to patterns, and outcomes are less predetermined. This is a process. It's not an event. And the goal is embracing this whole world of experience that is new to them. These are some of the substances and what they're useful for. I think this is in your handouts. I don't know where I got it. If it's yours, please tell me so that I can credit you. But MDMA has been used now it's got breakthrough status from the FDA. It has now been approved for the treatment of PTSD outside of the veteran system. There's very good evidence for alcohol use disorders and eating disorders. Psilocybin is used for a whole laundry list of disorders, and I think we don't know yet which are the ones that is going to be most effective. DMT, that's the active ingredient in ayahuasca. There's some talk about experimenting with that, using the clinical formulation, not the plant-based. And the DMT, ibogaine has been used very, very effectively in Europe and some places in, I believe it's either Australia or New Zealand, for opioid withdrawal. It's illegal in the United States. The reason that it hasn't been approved, or the reason that the FDA gives for it not being approved, is that there is a minuscule risk of heart attack and death. There's a risk of heart attack and death with cocaine. there are a lot of things. So maybe the research will catch up to practice. LSD for major depression and particularly migraines and cluster headaches. And mescaline has been, which is the active ingredient in the peyote mushroom, has been used for alcohol use disorder. And it was one of the things that helped to found what today we call the Red Road to Sobriety. The Red Road to, or Wellbriety is one of the things. But going back to the 19th century in Handsome Lake. Handsome Lake was, I forget the tribe that he was from. He was in the upper Northeast and actually traveled to the desert, traveled down to what is now Arizona and New Mexico, and brought peyote back to his tribe and used it as a part of the healing process. So the recap is, what do? These are the ones we're talking about. They all hit the dopamine system. The scheduling of these things at Schedule 1, it was very much premature. They're fast acting and they have some really long-term effects. When they're paired with professional positive results, increase. It's the same thing. I mean, the gold standard for depression treatment is not Prozac. It's Prozac and therapy. And we unfortunately have kind of gotten away from that. They are not addictive. There is not one single substance that we're talking about today that is addictive. So one thing we do have to be conscious of, though, is what are the interactions with prescription medications that we take. Now, this is a handout. I'm not going to read through this whole thing for you. It's on the website. You're welcome to take it and use it. But if anybody comes to you and says, well, hey, I've been thinking about taking ketamine therapy. What do you think about that? Or I've been thinking about going to that psilocybin clinic and maybe trying to deal with some of my sex abuse issues and some of the PTSD from that. Looking at what are the medications that might get in the way of that, and looking at drug-drug interactions. So these are all there. Looking at antidepressants, antipsychotics, and some of these things. So what are some of the effects that we can look for with this? What effects do they have? Visual and synesthesia, that's kind of the melding of sensory inputs where we smell sounds and we can taste music. It helps us to bring a different meaning to our life experience. It doesn't create a meaning for us. It just opens the door to something that was already there. Broaden the emotional sense. The key thing here is the altered sense of self. Most of the people who come to us are suffering from profound disconnection. Often disconnection with themselves. Often disconnection from their own best self, which is partly what brings us to our clinics. Some of the mystical experiences, the sense of unity, the sense of being part of everything that is, not in an intellectual sense. You know, any of you who know about the Gaia hypothesis, you know, we're all part of one great big organism. It's a much different level of connection. There's a sense of the sacred and transcendence. Time and space begin to take on an entirely different meaning. Positive mood. Ineffability. I don't know why that's there. I'm sorry, I haven't figured that out. I know what ineffable means, but I'm not sure what the contradiction, and also this noetic quality. There's a sense of a new beginning and a dissolution of the usual sense of self. This is from right up the road. This is from the fellows up in Portland who do ACT, Jason Lawama and those guys. Looking at these studies, they did a meta-study. And what were they looking for? They were looking for effects. They were looking for the effect horizon for these things. What they found was the selected patients had more successful outcomes in psychedelic-assisted therapy compared to placebo. Well, that's not a huge surprise. What was a surprise is how enduring the effects were. It was a larger effect, and also they appeared to be much more durable over time. So kind of looking at this, what do we need to do? Well, further research is needed. Finally, the FDA is really looking at MDMA and using that as a breakthrough approval for what they call compassionate use. There is also a breakthrough petition for psilocybin for end-of-life care, for palliative care at the end of life. Very, very good research that's emerging about that. So ketamine. This is the one that you're most likely to encounter because it is legal and has been for some time in the intranasal form. Discovered in 1962, it's an anesthetic. That's what it does. Of course, all drugs of abuse are basically anesthetics. This is certainly a drug of abuse. On the street, it's known as Special K, right? Or robo-tripping. No, that's dextromethorphan. That's a different thing. But it's a rapid-acting general anesthetic agent, which is one of the things that makes it effective, because the effect when you take it is almost immediate. Now legally prescribed, it is prescribed intranasally for depression, for intractable depression. I think the protocol is you have to have failed, 2 failed attempts with regular antidepressant medications. Like everything else, we take that with a grain of salt. So what does it do? Well, what happens is it really increases the presence and effectiveness of BDNF. And so I like the metaphor, it's like Miracle-Gro for the brain. So it amplifies the neurological properties by addressing some underlying psychological issues and bolstering a sense of healing. What we're doing is we're allowing the brain to grow faster, to make faster neuronal connections, to accelerate the process of neuroplasticity so that we get a faster healing. How is this usually done? Well, it's a method where doses of ketamine are delivered sometimes in 3. The therapist is with the person the whole time, and again, this is a significant time commitment because it's not a 50-minute session. And so, infusion therapy, which is not approved by the FDA, allows for much higher doses of ketamine, but more carefully titrated. With the Spravato, you get what you get. With like any kind of nasal inhaler, the dosage deteriorates over time. So what are some of the positive effects? This sense of ego dissolution, the positive effects, highly dependent on the dose administered. But there's a sense of drowsiness and dissociation, this kind of out-of-body experience, changes in perception, altered auditory perception and proprioception, which, as you know, is the awareness of body and space. But the main thing is that ego dissolution, the transcendence of space and time. It allows me to communicate with myself on a different level. What are some of the negative effects? Well, particularly, and most of this, by the way, does not come from the randomized studies. There are side effects, but most of this is from street use. Negative effects, anxiety, nausea, vomiting, dyspnea, like any other anesthetic, you can get into real trouble with it. A sense of disorientation, blunted affect, and emotional withdrawal. And really a sense of psychological distress. So what are some of the psychotherapeutic applications for this? Has a wide variety of treatment possibilities that are being looked at. One thing that's very promising is ruminative suicidal ideation. Not necessarily somebody who is intent on committing the act, but it's like they can't stop thinking about it. I have a trans patient who is very much like that, and she's not on the edge of the cliff, but she's like, she can't stop thinking about it. She just can't. And I've actually been thinking about referring her to one of the clinics in Eugene that does that. Substance use disorders. The idea of taking what is now an illegal substance to treat a substance dependence, kind of an interesting thought. There's good evidence for eating disorders, particularly eating disorders that have that kind of obsessive compulsive component to them. It seems to be very effective in alleviating that. So let's look back at our biases again. This is a rating of drugs ranked by relative harm. Alcohol is right up there on top. But it's legal. It's interesting. If alcohol had never existed, and some bright chemist in Sweden or Switzerland invented alcohol for the first time, you couldn't get it approved by the FDA, and if you did, it would be a Schedule II sedative hypnotic, and you couldn't get it without a prescription because of all the terrible side effects. Yes, it is a useful thing. It's a useful solvent for tinctures and things like that. It's also useful for disinfecting and stuff. But anyway, that's my rant on alcohol. You'll notice that the fourth one down is methamphetamine, which probably would be even more dangerous if they had spelled it correctly.
Was that methamphetamine?
Yeah, yeah, methamphetamine with an F. And they actually misspelled regular amphetamine, but anyway, there's probably somebody with ADHD. Sorry. But you look at LSD and psilocybin are way down at the bottom. There really is no risk that we usually associate with street drugs. So what are some of the specific risks? With ketamine, the acute risks in session, things like there's some disorientation and anxiety. If you're in session, we're able to control that because they can talk. I mean, it's not like they're, under. Yes, it's an anesthetic, but it's more like Versed. There's a psychotic effect with some folks, and there can be some cardiac things. You need to be careful also with drug-drug interactions. I think you have to be off an antidepressant for a month before you can use ketamine. That's my faulty memory, bringing that forward. Chronic use, again, we're talking street use. Some real problems with hepatic function, like any drug. Everything you put into your body goes through your liver. And abdominal cramping. I think that's supposed to be cramping. Sorry about that. With psilocybin, the acute risks, there's some disorientation, especially if you're not in a controlled setting. A fear response doesn't mix well with lithium. Chronic use risks, none that we know of. MDMA, not ecstasy. MDMA is the pharmaceutical preparation. There are some risks with hypothermia, again, particularly with the street drug. Chronic use, maybe some effect on cognition, but we're not really sure. So what do we do? Well, current trades and best practices, by the way, this is from Peter Addy, who's a psychologist in Eugene, who has really been on the growing edge of this movement for a long time. Wonderful resource. You should check out his website if you're interested. So ketamine, we talked about S-ketamine, which is the Spravato, the nasal inhaler. So looking at what's happening around the country, you'll notice that there are only 2 orange states or brown states here, nothing to do with politics. These are places that have taken a very proactive stance. Oregon and Colorado have taken a very proactive stance with looking at and investigating and getting research approvals for these kinds of things. Ballot Measure 109, that's the thing that legalized psilocybin in Oregon, set up a very complex and well thought out, I think, mechanism for getting approval, both for the manufacturing and for the administration. Psilocybin is not affected by the recent repeal of Measure 110, which recriminalized things like other drugs of abuse. A personal opinion clearly labeled as such. I do not think that the possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use ought to be a felony. And I've run drug court programs in 2 states, so I speak from experience. What happened in Oregon, I think, was a case of ready, shoot, aim. They thought, well, this is a great idea and we're going to do this, but the mechanism lagged behind. Just like deinstitutionalization in the 1960s, the money never followed, and so there wasn't money allocated for the advanced treatment that was supposed to be happening. Unfortunately, the whole drug court process or therapeutic court process was pretty much left out of the planning. If they had put that in on the front end, I think it would have had a very different effect. But having a felony on your record when you've been sober for 20 years, it's a real problem. Anyway, that's my rant. These are the folks up in Eugene again, in Portland again, looking at first day with my new teeth, psilocybin assisted therapy for major depressive disorder. using ACT. They're the ACT guys up in Portland. Looking at some of these studies embedded with, of course, embedded within a larger experience of psychotherapy, set and setting. We talked a little bit about that. Talked about mechanism of action. There's nothing new there. They introduced the ACT Hexaflex into it. I'm not going to do this. If you're interested, Dr. Sanjay Gupta has a nice little clip on YouTube about, and the link is there. You can take it at your leisure. But random controlled studies for use of for psychedelics for MCD, looking at, and this is a meta-analysis, looking at psilocybin, 45% remission compared to waitlist. This is kind of a breakdown of the psilocybin services in Oregon. Again, this is in your handouts. I'm not going to go through it here. But now, and I just checked this last week, there are now 23 psilocybin service centers that are active in the state. This is a coming thing. And as professionals, we need to be ahead of the curve and ready to be able to discuss this stuff intelligently, whatever your opinion and your boundaries about that are. License facilitator requirements. They won't just let anybody be a trip sitter. That's in statute. They have to be 21 years or older, high school diploma or equivalent, must be an Oregon resident, have to pass a criminal background check, complete a psilocybin facilitator training program, which is very expensive. It is not cheap to do that. And have to pass an exam. For some odd reason, clinicians are excluded in the statute. Makes no sense to me, but there it is. Administration for the patient, something like that's 8 to 10,000. That's for the training. Administration is about $2,500. So, again, looking at some of these meta-analyses, ayahuasca compared to, again, we're talking about depression here. Ayahuasca, 36% increase versus placebo. Psilocybin, 57% compared to escitalopram. We're going to come back to that one in a minute. Psilocybin, again, compared to placebo. Very, very strong research supporting symptom relief. Now, this is the course of psilocybin. What happens is there's a screening process, there's the preparation, there's a first administration, sometimes a second administration, and then a post thing, and then 6-month follow-up. These things are really crucial to the whole experience because the effects are ongoing. They don't just stop at the end of the session. And so it's really important, pardon me, to help these people integrate this information into their new life. Psilocybin versus Lexapro for depression. Okay, so 59 adults, small sample size, but looked at depression scores for the same folks. Psilocybin versus escitalopram, no significant difference between escitalopram and psilocybin. Oh, let me read this a little more carefully. 2 doses of psilocybin versus 42. Oh, no difference, really? Where's the comparison there? 50 milligrams of psychedelic as opposed to 630 milligrams of escitalopram with all of the attendant, side effects. I think we need to pay attention to this. You saw this before. This is this incredible burgeoning of connections within the brain. This is a brain scan. This isn't just a nice graphic. The Ames Institute has petitioned the FDA. Ames Institute is out of Seattle, I believe. Petitioned the FDA to reschedule psilocybin off of Schedule 1 to at least Schedule 2 so you could get it with a prescription, and authorize compassionate use. That's for palliative end-of-life care. The FDA has declined to do that, but now they're going to be filing an appeal. MDMA, related to methamphetamine, although the pharmacology and the effects are very, very different. Methamphetamine is, normal amphetamines are really uppers. MDMA has a much more calming effect. Again, this is some of the history. 1985 gave the DEA authority to level an emergency ban at any drug that it thought might be a public danger. So the DEA, who are not scientists, they're not pharmacologists, they're not physicians, they're not psychologists, they said, boy, this sounds really stupid. I think let's ban it. So now this is beginning to come back around. MAPS, I forget what the acronym stands for, but they're doing a phase 2 study in Spain. It has been used very, very successfully by the VA. It really wasn't 2077. I gotta proofread this more carefully. So what's happened now is it's been available for use. This is typically how it happens. There's a pre-screening and enrollment process, and you'll notice that there's a loop here, so that it's after 2-month follow-up, there's the opportunity for other sessions. What does it do? Well, what are some of the outcomes from this one study? I forget what the N is. It's on there somewhere. 83% of participants no longer met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD at the end of these sessions. And 6 months later, and up to 3.8 years later, the benefits were maintained over time. I think this is something that's worth looking at. Peyote and mescaline. I'm including this because it's out there. I mean, it is still considered Schedule 1, although in 1991, I think, basically the federal government said, we're going to ignore this, and if you're a member of the Native American Church, or if you're a roadman, we're not going to prosecute you. So mescaline found in the cactus in the San Pedro Valley, actually a very small area in New Mexico and a corner of Arizona. It is used in the Native American Church. It's also available, you can find it on the street, and there is counterfeit mescaline that's available on the street. Used, again, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in ceremony. There's Doors of Perception was a classic book by Aldous Huxley. And with other classic psychedelics, the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, which was basically Richard Nixon's response to the anti-war movement, decided to make it illegal. There is a very strong, rather than a therapeutic sense, in the sense that we have, as psychologists and therapists think about it, there is a very rigid structure, a ceremonial structure around the use of it. Native American church members they're very jealous of, kind of this wider use of that substances. It is ceremonial. It is the equivalent of taking communion in your Christian church to them. So what does it do? It has influences similar to other psychedelics, but not quite as sharp. The onset is much slower, and as I mentioned, I have had some lived experience with this. But the onset is much more gradual, which means that for some patients it might be more less distressing than because the onset with Spravato is slower, but with intravenous ketamine and some of these other drugs, the onset is immediate. This is a much more gentle. So some of the risks of side effect. One of the reasons that I say nobody gets addicted to peyote, the first thing that happens when you take the peyote tea, usually it's brewed into a tea, which is very foul smelling. It's not a pleasant aroma. And when you drink the tea, the first thing that happens is you throw up. So this is not this is not something that you want to do on a weekend when you, instead of mowing the grass. But what are some of the, one of the things that happens is there's this kind of, if you ever played video games or certain, there's this, all of a sudden things begin to take on a geometric thing. Also, some people have visions. I was privileged to be invited to be part of a Native American church ceremonies when I worked on the Navajo Nation. And it can be a very powerful experience. It certainly was for me. Again, listed Schedule 1, but the government kind of looks the other way. This is some of the enduring positive life changes that have been reported as a result of that use of mescaline. Now, mescaline is the pharmaceutical preparation. If we're going to do research, that's what we're going to be using. But again, you can control the dose much more effectively. That's the citation. Again, this was that transcendent experience when this gentleman took it. All of a sudden, there was this sense of knowingness. There was this sense of being part of this larger thing. Again, works on the serotonin system. This I thought was kind of an interesting. White participants who took peyote in a research setting had experiences characterized by suspiciousness and feelings of meaninglessness and distress, hallucinations that were not egosyntonic at all. Interestingly, when Native American church folks use it the way that it's intended to be used, they had a much different experience. I can't imagine what would happen if you plopped some Native American folks who weren't prepared for it into a Southern evangelical tent meeting. I wonder what their, no disrespect to either tradition, but come on, it's about context, folks. LSD, old wine in new bottles. Discovered in 1938, highly studied and very successfully researched up until about 1970 when, again, the counterculture movement inspired it to become illegal. Made illegal in 1967. It's taken a while to come back to this. So how does it work? LSD is studied intensely early on for the treatment of mental disorders, but it was popularized by the counterculture movement and became. Now, underground LSD advocates have been promoting this for a long time. A number of these things today, the therapeutic community is starting to wake up to this, and there are a number of studies that are going on out there, not as many but what we're talking about here is microdosing, not the heroic dose that you sometimes hear about. In the heroic dose, there have been instances of people who had a psychotic break and didn't come back. But you can have a stroke if you use too much amphetamine. It's the dose, not necessarily the substance itself. This granting breakthrough designation, there is one derivative of it that has actually been approved for therapeutic use as a breakthrough designation. MM120 is the name of it. I'm sure that some pharmaceutical company will be charging $1,000 a dose before very long. Sorry. Backing up for a moment. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Ayahuasca. Most of you have heard of Gabor Mate. Gabor Mate has been promoting the use of ayahuasca for a long time. He's taken a number of people down to South America and run basically ayahuasca clinics. Used over 1,000 years, again, indigenous people. There is a Again, there is a church that is associated with the use of ayahuasca that has been granted kind of the same window as the Native American church. But risks and side effects, again, it can be fairly unpleasant. But again, if we're going to do research, we're going to be using the DMT. We're going to be using the laboratory formulation, not boiling two roots together, which is the way that ayahuasca is made. Still illegal. A lot of research studies. Now, for those of us who work with folks with substance use disorders, where does this fit with the abstinence model? Well, in 1955, Bill Wilson was doing LSD. He likened it to the conversion experience that he had in the hospital in New York, which led to his long-term abstinence from alcohol and the forming of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was it. But he had a vision that dropped him to his knees, and he describes it as having the whole universe open up. He was being detoxed with chloral hydrate. So this may in fact have been a drug-induced mystical experience. Nobody made that connection until many years later. But he, together with Aldous Huxley and some other folks, he was very, very hopeful that this would be very, very helpful in helping people with substance use disorder, particularly alcohol. So AA's way of telling the story is he was very enthusiastic about it because many of the things about the 12-step programs have to do with the dissolution of ego. Interestingly, the 12 steps have absolutely nothing to do with quitting drinking. Nowhere in the steps does it say that you can't drink or use drugs. It doesn't say that. And even if it did, the only place it's referred to is the first half of the first step. The other 11 and a half steps are, oh my God, now what? Now that I've given up my number one coping skill, okay. So it's really not that antithetical. So why is it that this might be useful? Substance use is ultimately a disease of isolation. Substance use, substance dependence ultimately leaves me alone with my disease. It is the most isolating experience that you can possibly imagine. Because you know that if you don't stop, you're going to die. And you feel like you can't stop. It's a miserable place to be. What happens though is that the disease process disconnects me from everything around me. Think about depression, think about PTSD, think about all of those are disorders of disconnection. So one of the things that LSD or some of these other things can do can bring about this sense of being a part of a larger whole. The opposite of addiction is not abstinence. The opposite of addiction is connection, which is why the support fellowships and for anything, I mean, NAMI, is very, very effective for folks with severe mental illness. But when you look at the parts of the brain that are affected, and if you're interested, there's a whole workshop on this called Heroin is My Mother and Booze is My Father, Addiction as an Attachment Disorder. Because it fires the same parts of the brain, the anterior cingulate gyrus in particular, that are involved with attunement and attachment. So that's one of the things that it allows us to do is to reattach. You don't have to do it. That's one of the things that fellowship meetings and getting together with other folks can do as well. So there's a big resurgence. What do they manifest? This central human experience, this sense of being a part of a greater thing, and the very sense of my humanity appears to be deepened. So can 12-step groups and psychedelic addiction treatment coexist? Absolutely, it appears that they can. Again, there is nothing in the 12 steps that says that this is not something that you cannot do. There is, in addition to the Native American Church, there is also a subset of them, of that organization, that does not necessarily exclude non-Native people, but using psychedelics in recovery. It's a peer support meeting, just like any 12-step meeting. So Ibogaine is another one. It's been used very successfully in Europe, and I think either Australia or New Zealand, I forget which, for opioid detox. Again, it's often used on the street, and it's a lot like kratom in the sense that in very small doses, it can have some therapeutic effects, and in large doses, it can really mess you up. Ibogaine, I'm not real hopeful that there's going to be a lot of movement in terms of getting it. But okay, so the bottom line is, what do we do? When our people come to us and say, I've been using, or I'm thinking about using ketamine, I'm thinking about doing Spravato, I'm thinking about the psilocybin, what do we do? Again, Dr. Peter Addy's really ahead of the curve on this. What do we do? Like anything else, we assess for safety. It's the first thing we do. And then looking at how can we help normalize the abnormal experience that is the whole purpose of taking this. A lot of it has to do with being able to predict and normalize some things that might happen. We explore the experience from a number of different aspects. And most importantly, continuing therapy is not one and done. It's very, very important to realize that. The other thing is knowing when to refer, knowing who it's not good for, like anything else. So the main thing is keep on learning. I'm really grateful to the Oregon Psychological Association for the opportunity to do this, because I think that it's our obligation to stay current with what's going on in this little corner of the field that is going to be expanding very quickly. So 5 principles. Again, this is Peter Addy. Assess for safety, using grounding techniques and resourcing. I use EMDR resourcing a lot in working with folks. Help them explore and to integrate the experience, both explore what it's likely to be and afterward. Receiving continual and ongoing care. So this is a whole bunch of these are some other things that are available through other CE trainings that are available. They're approved because it's a NADAC approved curriculum. It's approved by the Psychology Board in Oregon. That isn't true in all states. But enough about that. Questions, comments? Challenge me. Things aren't true just because I say they are. Yes, sir.
Comment, testimonial. I don't often like to qualify myself, but I've been in abstinence-based 12-step recovery for over 37 years. I do crisis intervention at festivals like Burning Man that are associated with a lot of psychedelic drug use. I completed the MAPS, which is Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Thank you. That's what the acronym means. He's the expert.
I really can't hear you.
MDMA assisted psychotherapy training, and I've done preparation and integration visits with clients of mine. I'll just go back to that slide that, for the initial FDA study for MDMA assisted therapy. Did you see that 80% of the participants no longer met the criteria for PTSD? Recall that the drug trials that Dr. Raj presented to us yesterday, the psychotherapy, the stuff in our field is things like 60% of people got 30% better. You do not see results like that 80% no longer need. So I really, our clients deserve us to know enough about this as an option that is available. And it's safe, it's effective, if properly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Again, what does the acronym stand for? Somebody over here was asking.
Multidisciplinary Association for for psychedelic studies. They also, by the way, have an arm that does harm reduction, psychedelic support for people having challenging experiences at festival. So they're very
Excellent. Can we hook up that? I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
we can
wrong verb. Can we confer? Yes, ma'am.
I, as a psychologist, at the request of people that I see, I got trained at the California Institute of Integrated Studies and then did the InterTrek training also. I have chosen in Oregon to be a ketamine therapist because of the huge expense presently for people doing it legally. I want it to be known, though, that every service center and every trained facilitator has to have an equity plan. And I believe like within a year or two, it's so expensive to have a service center, you have a $10,000 fee every year, and as a facilitator, a $2,000 fee, quite a bit more than
I'm not attacking grabbing my coffee.
than our psychology. I also want to say, as a person who's chosen to do ketamine, I work in community mental health, and so many people have so much depression. Esketamine is incredibly expensive and hard to get any coverage for people who live below the poverty level. Ketamine, which there's really good research, it just has not been able to have the research of esketamine, because esketamine, they changed a molecule so that they could have it be a new drug.
They patented it.
Ketamine itself is really inexpensive, and the Oregon Health Plan will actually pay for ketamine suspension, which isn't the easiest way in my mind to have it. I would prefer working with troches. I can do it in my office as a trained
That's
person
what
through
troches are,
Polaris,
sublingual.
and troche is like a little lozenge that you dissolve under your tongue.
It's a gummy.
And I plan, stuff. I've been working with people who've been depressed for really years, and I'm doing a small study with long-term survivors of HIV that'll be starting actually this month, so that I can try to get funding for marginalized people to be able to have this incredibly valuable treatment that I'm finding with people who I've used EMDR, IFS, ACT, everything with, that with ketamine, in having spaced sessions in my office, and I want to say with ketamine also because it works in the glutamate system, you can be on antidepressants. You don't have to go off of them. And you have people checked medically ahead of time because you want to make sure people's blood pressure is below a certain point, and you're looking at their oxygenation, blood pressure, and pulse, even though that's rarely an issue. And even when they list the side effects, really hardly anybody has nausea, maybe 5 to 10% of people. But I think it's I'm seeing amazing things with people who've been able to find no way of breaking through. And it is something, if we choose to work with people who can't afford ways of doing it, as a licensed psychologist, I have the training and it's legal, and I have a great prescriber, and I suggest looking into it.
Yeah.
And ask me any questions if you want to know more about it, as I'm here today.
Thank you.
I'm a believer.
I had breakfast with your seatmate, and she was singing your praises of the stuff that you were doing. So, yes, ma'am.
I just was curious if there's any, you were talking about how the Oregon is regulating the psilocybin and the facilities, and it's pretty shocking how, as you said, that therapists and licensed providers for psychology aren't even part of that discussion or in that group. And is there anything that's from the OPA's side that's trying to get us into that fold so we can participate as facilitators without having to go through a $10,000? We all have
Right.
master's degrees,
Right.
just trying to figure that one out.
You're your board members are right here. They're, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But I mean, yes, that is where, you know, OPA can really have a tremendous difference. NPO, the Nursing Association, has been very active lobbying, particularly because nurse practitioners, being prescribers and independent practice in Oregon, they can do the infusions. They can do that stuff, and so they've been very proactive in that. But yeah,
I think she might have an answer.
Yeah,
she does.
I believe that the reason that it is set up that way is not anti-psychologists or therapists. It was to not medicalize everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people, I'd say over half of the people who were in the training program that I was in, that was 6 months long and very intense, with a lot on consent and teaching people things in more depth than I got in my psychology program, how to work with people, especially around consent and helping people be safe. But it's not anti that, and so many of the people who were there were people who are therapists and nurses and naturopaths. There's training that you get in it that is not just about working with the different things like depression or post-traumatic stress. It's a whole lot about understanding how to be with different substances, just like the things that you were teaching, and that you have to have supervised practice, at least 40 hours of supervision. I did go, in order to be a practitioner at over 70 years old, I went to Mexico to experience and to really ask if this is the right thing for me to be doing. But especially for end-of-life stuff, both psilocybin and ketamine are incredible. And there's great training programs. But you have to have, by the Oregon law, the training program that most of them are 6 months, and I believe they're worth the money. And they're not to keep out us. We can have lots of input, and I think do, but it is that you need training in the medicines also.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, very much. Very, very informative. You have a couple of wonderful resources right here. I saw Paul over here somewhere.
Just on that, the training to be with the person while they're having the psychedelic experience, that's what the training is for. And think about it, that's not always the best use of a licensed professional's time to sit with someone for 6 to 8 hours. Do you want to charge them $200, $100 to $200 an hour for that? As opposed to someone who's well trained to help someone through the experience. And then I feel like our focus and expertise is in the preparation and integration session.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Just personal kind of flippant comment. I don't want to sit with someone tripping for 6 to 8 hours. That's I know how, it's great, but that's not what I want to do with my own.
Yeah, right. No, right. It's not a good use of your expertise. Your expertise is in different things. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to build on those comments as well and ask about the 80% recovery rate, and was type of therapy explored? I mean, I know I could go look for the original source, but what my question is leading to is that the psychotherapy outcome research shows that 50% of the change is just due to non-specific factors, but there is also an added benefit depending at times on type of treatment. So
Sure.
I have been trained in and used cognitive processing therapy in my trauma work. So I was really excited to hear about the PTSD remission. But I think there's also a really good window for cognitive processing therapy, either during or after. I mean, you don't want somebody under the influence doing that. But getting into that real connection of emotion and cognition.
Yeah, and I think the reason that, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a researcher, but I think part of that may be because in a study, the therapy could be a confounding variable, or the person administering the therapy could be a confounding variable. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if 50% of the improvement is due to non-specific factors, and we can add our therapy to that. Wow. I mean, I think that that's truly amazing. But yeah, again, if you go back to the original research on antidepressant medications, the gold standard was medication plus therapy. And then the pharmaceutical industry got involved and said, well, no, you don't really need that, so, you know, the medicine will stand alone. But,
Well, related to that, like I had a long-term client who went through ketamine therapy in a clinical setting, but I thought she was going to be meeting with a therapist during the sessions, and that's not in fact what happened. So she was supervised medically by a psychiatrist that I had consulted with before, but I kind of thought he was gonna be involved while she was getting the medication, and he wasn't. So I don't think she got nearly the benefit from that she could have. Fortunately now, I'm working with another client getting a Spravato, and through the magic of telehealth, she's able to be in the service center getting the med, and I'm able to be on telehealth with her to do a support session.
wonderful.
I learned more about her in a couple of sessions than I did in the prior year of working with her.
Again, those barriers those barriers and those filters that separate us from other people, that's one of the things that the psychedelic experience does, is it makes some of those defenses at least semi-permeable membranes, you know, so that we're able to a greater extent to connect with the people around us. That's good, thank you for that. Any other comments?
I can point you to the write-up for that 80% reduction trial it's in a peer-reviewed journal, and the protocol's super specific, so you can look and see what they did and how they did it. But their approach to sitting with someone during the MDM was super specific, the way it's a version of support and open-ended.
It's research.
But it's not interventionist, you're not
Right.
getting the person to change things, you're getting them to let their natural healing process unfold, is what they call it. It sounds flaky, but when you see it described, it works.
And if you get 83% remission after a year and a half, when you're just a potted plant in the corner, can you imagine what active therapy would do?
If I could have one more quick thing.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the Netflix special, How to Change Your Mind, in the book by Michael Pollan?
You have exceeded my experience. I don't know of that.
All right, I just.
Please let us know.
The journalist Michael Pollan wrote a book called How to Change Your Mind about different aspects of psychedelic experience, and then it was turned into a 4-episode Netflix special. So it shows a lot of clinical sessions going on and people's experiences both during and after.
Thank you for that.
The psychotherapy with psychedelics. Pretty great book and series.
Great, thank you for that. Okay.
I just wanted to.
One second, this young lady?
My question is there a substance that blocks the therapeutic benefits? So like, okay, so you take MDMA in a therapeutic environment, but then you do something else, would it like stop?
That's way outside that's an excellent question. It's way outside my scope. I don't know that there's anything that you could do like naloxone, you know, to reverse, you know, a person who's having an adverse experience. I don't know of anything, but that's really a good question. Yes?
I would say to that there's a lot in the training around, like you stated initially, of having people be really well resourced when they go in, and that you have various setups for people if things do come up, and people are reminded in the very beginning in a kind of meditative way that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I will be here. And you set up consent for touch, and it's completely defined in the Oregon Health Authority. It's like you can touch someone on their shoulder, you can hold their hand, and I'm trying to remember, I think you can touch their head, but you can't touch them anywhere else, and that's written. But you do have really good things defined, and I think that's the thing with sitting and knowing a lot of people who are facilitators now. They speak of the profound experience, actually, of sitting, that you're not doing therapy while a person's having a psilocybin experience, but you are helping them through, and when things come up, you're there and you help them at the end to be integrating or when they begin to come out of it. And I want to say with ketamine, I think part of what happened, because it came so much from the medical model, I was incredibly skeptical because I heard people who would go have IV treatments that were expensive and they wouldn't have any therapy with them. I had a guy who told me his psychiatrist said, "You're depressed, you've had a cancer diagnosis, why don't while I have lunch you take some ketamine and lie?" I mean, where there was just no therapy.
Yeah.
And with it, by the dose that you give, it has a great range. You can have people be in a state where they can process abuse situations that they've had, or you can have them be in a deeper place where they're more apt to have ineffable experiences. But I think it's I'm saying all this because I, as a psychologist, had so little background in it, and it was through the clients and people I see that I started learning the research. So,
Thank you. Gentleman back here,
Hold on.
we got a runner. Thank you. This is for the folks that are on Zoom.
My question is around what kind of risks or considerations would you bring to this example? I have a patient who they have a lot of past history with recreational psychedelic use and mixed experiences, but their kind of general kind of perception is they've had lots of bad trips and kind of want to stay away. I'm very convinced too that it has had a pretty significant impact on their brain in some ways. I guess I'm curious around, would psychedelic assisted therapies be helpful? Would there be risks with the previous use? I guess what considerations would you bring, I guess, to that?
I have to reply with the 3 smartest words in the English language. I don't know. But I would think that, you know, if you could magically make one appear, a referral to a neuropsychologist would be a good thing to do. There may be some things through brain imaging, but again, I think that the expectation that they bring to it will really define the experience to a great extent. If you can help them talk through or help them process the fact that those earlier experiences were not therapeutic in nature, they were recreational in nature, and therefore really didn't have much of a therapeutic benefit. And even if it was a bad recreational experience, it isn't necessarily something for therapy. Perhaps trying a different psychedelic might, you know, I think that there are a number of ways that you could approach that safely, but I'd approach it very carefully with, you know, rigidly documented consents and all that sort of stuff.
Is there increased risk for like a psychotic episode or anything like that?
Not in the literature that I'm aware of. And again, I'm not a researcher. I don't read referee journals for fun. So I don't know the answer to that. But again, that's some research that I would want to do if I had a patient like that. I would want to go dig into the research and really find out so that we could really do truly informed consent. Any questions from the Zoom folk?
I'm sure we are. But we have to go to the screen share to get to it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
We can, Taylor.
Okay, perfect. Then I have one question here in the chat. It says, experiential psychotherapist differing from CBT, ACT, and psychodynamic focus on change through the amygdala to the frontal cortex, like the substances you described appear to potentially change. Are there comparative studies versus or with these psychotherapies relative to effectiveness?
Did I hear the word chronic pain in there?
No.
Okay. again, Jason Lamoma and the folks at Oregon Psychiatric up in Portland would be a very good resource for that. Many of the researches that are coming out actually look at using this as an adjunctive therapy, but to reinforce the already existing therapeutic modalities. I would guess that something like ACT, I would guess that something like internal family systems, I would guess that things like EMDR might be more effective, because again, part of what we're doing is we're down-regulating the prefrontal cortex and escalating the healing properties that are inherent in the limbic system. So we're altering the balance. I don't know of any research that says that, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy or REBT would be ineffective under this circumstance, but it seems to me that it's unlikely to hurt and might help, but the therapeutic effect really occurs within the limbic system. As we all know, the limbic system and the cerebral cortex don't communicate very well together. The limbic system is, interestingly, only thinks in images. It doesn't understand words at all, doesn't understand language. And so the limbic system only thinks in pictures. And so that's one of the reasons that visualization types of things can be so effective. Now, if you look at the psychedelic experience through that lens, I'm imprinting a very positive image of a desired future state in the part of the brain that drives all of my behavior. Seems like that could be pretty powerful stuff. And indeed it turns out to be, according to the research that we've been looking at. So, anything else? Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you sincerely for the work that you do, bringing hope, help, and healing to the people that we serve. Whether we're using psychedelics or anything else, this is a sacred trust. This is important work that we do, and I really want to thank you for that and celebrate that. And by the way, in the interest of full disclosure, this presentation was prepared using natural intelligence, and no AI chatbots were harmed in the making of this presentation. There's a QR code here that's probably pretty far away to grab off your phone. If you want, there's some small cards up here with the QR code that'll take you to the updated version of the slides and the handouts. The handouts and slides are available, as you know, on the website for OPA. And if you're interested, there's also some flyers about some possible trainings. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Alrighty. Up there. Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. It was wonderful. And thank you to everyone for your participation and wonderful questions and expertise. Our next presentation will be starting at 11, so you'll have a little bit of extra time to mingle, check out the presentations and the exhibitions in the foyer.
And I'll be here, so if anybody wants to chat one-on-one, I'm here. You're here to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
I'll also add that the student poster presentations are in with the copy.
Yes.
So go check those out.
Some very interesting stuff in there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very impressive.
I don't mind too, I wanna get your contact.
Entertainment value.
Let me, I have it in my purse.
I was just taking the other card.
I am actually in the process of starting